So who said this? Head of a university of which country said this? He's made it, this is what he said, he's made it, been characterized this way: an emphatic appeal to all university leaders to demonstrate solidarity in the face of, quote, growing populism, end quote, and to ensure that universities counter, quote, issues, diagnoses, end quote, that are fabricated or exaggerated with evidence and reward critical thought. So, what university or what country, the leader of that country's university system said that? Any idea?
Probably in Turkey, but I don't know.
Don't forget to speak.
Vienna, Austria.
Sorry.
So they're going through, I guess there's some concern there as well. But we're reaching our last panel for the day. We're grateful to them. One of our panel members, I guess, is on his way or has not been able to join us. We don't know for sure. We've been trying to reach out to him. But, so that just means more time for our other panel members, and we'll enjoy your remarks. And I'd like to introduce Kathleen Stevenson, who will moderate this. Kathleen is our Vice Chair for Programs at the GIC, and going to lead this conversation. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for sticking, and you're real troopers. This has been a long day, but it's been an awfully important and interesting day. The last panel will be quite interesting because it's really forward-looking. As per the title, it's New Initiative in Higher Education. And we will hear from our two speakers. First, Tony Di Taranto, who is CEO and Director of Vimo Education, and you'll see the bio in the handout. And then from Bruce Cohen, Managing Director at Citi. Now, it will be important simply because it is building on conversations and discussions that we had earlier. Tony will be talking about particularly financing of education. And what we heard, particularly from Jeffrey, the build-up in the debt, in student debt, has been quite remarkable, to say the least. And just before I handed the mic to Tony, it reminded me of how different some systems are. So the last time I was in Finland, I visited with the son of friends of mine, and he was at the time studying at the University of Helsinki. And he apologized because he was a little bit busy. He was busy joining fellow students striking. Now, why were they striking? They were striking because the government had not increased their student stipend for 2 years, and they wanted more money. Now, that's in stark contrast with the graph that we saw in terms of build-up of student debt in this country. So with that in mind, Tonio has a solution, so please go ahead.
Something to say at least. And I think Jill or Colleen, if I press the button here, it'll show a slide, right?
Of course.
I'll speak when it's getting set up to personalize this. I started my career in the Marines, but I went to law school after that, and the first job I ever had as a civilian was in education finance. So I just needed a job. I went to law school in DC. It was near Sallie Mae. I worked at Sallie Mae. And I went into private practice, and I continued representing people trying things in education finance. And so some of them were really big businesses doing the same thing over and over, big banks, and others were innovative startups. And so most recently I was with a company called SoFi, which does education finance, but really doesn't, as many people as that company or as we helped there, reducing their payment obligation, company is definitely more finance than education. It didn't really address what I would say is a root problem here. And I'm not trying to spike the ball on Dr. Gold, who just gave us all these numbers already, but like, there was a time when students and parents looked really aspirationally at college. Not that the time's over, but there was a time when that was the way that everybody looked at this. And the question they would ask is, can I afford it? And government responded to that, families responded to that. It brought us a step crisis. It brought us tuition that's inflated. For the actual numbers, tuition's grown more quickly than earnings. And now students and parents are asking a different question. They're asking, is this worth it? That's a problem for colleges. So colleges have to answer, is this worth it, in a way that they didn't before. And they need a tool for that. So the schools are responding to that as they can. I think one thing that schools could consider here, and that I've been working on for a few years with this company, is income-based finance. And so the name for this kind of agreement is an income share agreement. But this would be where some amount of tuition is waived up front in exchange for a % of a graduate's earnings for a defined period of time, with no payments over a cap, and nothing owed if somebody's earning less than a minimum threshold. And that varies by school. What I'm saying, but I design these for colleges and other kinds of schools. And so to give a couple examples, I think I would just touch really quickly. These are all schools that have too much information on the slide, but this is a diverse group of schools. Bottom line, it's a diverse group of schools. In Pennsylvania, I have 4 clients, 3 colleges, 1 non-college. Each one of these is trying to answer the question, is this worth it to a student who's attending, whether that's an adult learner who already has an undergraduate degree like a General Assembly, whether it's an undergraduate who's coming from out of state at Purdue, or whether it's somebody at Crawford University, it's a private nonprofit in New York, who's choosing between them and a regional public. And Governor Cuomo has the Excelsior free college publics there. So they all have a value prop they need to communicate, a value proposition they need to communicate, and they're choosing to say to people, you only have to pay some or all of this if it works, and works as defined by the 80% of students and parents who care a lot about career paths. And you can see that they're looking at these. Norwich sends a lot of people to the military. Messiah College sends a lot of people in the ministry. It's not about maximizing income. These schools are looking at this as a way to communicate value to families, not a way to maximize revenue at the school. And so, what do I want to tell you? I'll just share a couple of examples really quickly. A school like General Assembly can be done, which is a code school, could be 10% of somebody's income for 36 months. It's not in connection with student loans. There's no other tuition at the school. And so, and of course, at the school, 100% of the value proposition is the employment outcome. It's the only reason you go to that. If you look, and that's analogous in higher ed to something like a nursing credential for an adult learner. They may have a passion for learning, but they probably burned that passion up the same time they burned all their federal student aid in their teens and 20s. And now they're in their 30s and they really just need this credential. And the school who sells them, by the way, the problem I'm solving isn't how do you pay for college. The problem I'm solving is how do you pick the school that's best for you? Because if you're that adult learner who's looking at the nursing credential, somebody's got a great television ad on at night. Is that the right school? Somebody has a really aggressive boiler room and they're going to call you every day until you finally show up. Is that the right school? Or is it the school that says, no, we understand you're actually trying to buy a nursing job, not just a nursing credential. We're a school with the mission to help people like you in our region, public or private nonprofit. We're the one you should choose. We're going to meet you where you are, which is probably had a bad experience with student debt already, probably no more federal student aid. And so I think, so some quick examples of how we've seen this done. The code school example, we've seen adult learners done. We did one of these with Colorado Mountain College. It's a public institution, 11 campuses in Colorado. We did a program there for Dreamers. Those are DACA eligible students. They can't get federal student aid. They're also often from backgrounds that are culturally diverse. So nobody in that family wants to go into debt for something that might not work. And we've seen this, and so use cases range from that to encouraging people to go into service careers, like at Messiah College, or displacing private student loans on a campus like at Purdue University. And we're finding that our school clients have been very successful in communicating value and communicating to families that this is one way, if the employment outcome is value, to communicate that. Obviously, if your value is prestige, Neo Students is selling that, and if it's medical school acceptance, that's something else, right? So there's different reasons people do all these things, and we're just one little piece. Piece of trivia, people ask about these terms. Income share, monthly payment, payment cap, threshold, and how important are they? We just had a student at Purdue who has an income share agreement win the Powerball. And thank goodness, right, there's a cap. So important consumer protections there. Nobody would ever want to sign up for one of those again if some student had been hit for, $10 million on it. It was $180 million cash, actually, is the first one. So I think I'll stop there. I just wanted to seed a lot of this idea, and I'm sure you'll have questions very particular to your circumstances later. Thank you.
So now we're shifting a little bit gear with a new or not so new partnership, which again I think builds on some of the comments that we heard earlier today, but also is giving really an innovative lens to the higher education and the partnership with the private sector. Bruce?
Thank you. So as Kathleen said, I'm Bruce Cohen from Citi, and I'm responsible for human resources globally for our operations and technology division. We're in over 100 countries, and as we've heard today, both operations and technology are going through some profound transformations as a result of the emerging technologies we're talking about. And so I'm excited to talk to you about this very new partnership that Citi has with Cornell Tech and the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. So Mayor Michael Bloomberg had a vision for New York City in 2010. He wanted New York to accelerate its growth of its tech center because he saw technology as an engine of economic growth and could produce jobs for New York. And here's Mayor Bloomberg at the ribbon cutting for the Cornell Tech School. One important ingredient in his recipe of growth was to have a world-renowned academic institution, university, establish a graduate school of applied sciences, not only in New York City, but in a very special, unique, underutilized location in the city. He convinced the city council to gift the land on Roosevelt Island to the winner of a contest that pit Stanford versus Cornell for the prize. And Cornell, partnering with the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, was awarded the opportunity and moved forward with enthusiasm. Here's the campus, which has 3 buildings. The one on the left is the Bloomberg Center, the academic building. The tall building in the center is the residence dormitory, which happens to be a passive house. If you're following environmentally real estate trends, a passive house is a building, and this is one of the first buildings in any university in the United States that is an official passive house. A passive house is a building that requires almost no electricity to power the entire building, designed in such a way that it uses 5% of the typical power that a building would of this size, so it's pretty neat. And the building on the right is the Innovation Center, which I'll talk about. So not only did Cornell select 3 different highly regarded architect firms for the first 3 buildings on its new campus, Cornell made a very courageous decision, and that one of these buildings would be an innovation lab, where companies could do cutting-edge and transformative work, exploring how technology could solve complex problems in industries such as finance, healthcare, and the environment. Those companies have this very special opportunity to collaborate with the faculty and students of the school. The Bridge building, as it was initially referred to, would symbolize this bridge that it hoped to make between business and academia. What a brilliant idea at the very beginning of its presence on its new campus on Roosevelt Island. The campus sits on a 12-acre plot of land with magnificent views of the New York City skyline, as you see here. City's global head of operations and technology, Don Callahan, pictured here, along with Dean Dan Huttenlocker, the dean of the Cornell Tech School, and some third guy, decided to seize this unique opportunity. And in many ways, City and Cornell have a shared mission. Both institutions born in the 1800s. Both institutions have remained relevant, I would say, by continually adapting and innovating, often transforming itself by leveraging technology. Innovation has always been critical to City's mission to enable growth and economic progress for the world for our 206-year history. City's CEO, Mike Corbett, supported our plan to take space at the Bridge building. And we decided as part of this plan that we would follow the spirit of the Bridge theme and invite 4 of our critical technology teams doing important work in 4 distinctive areas of City to come together in our space in the Innovation Center. This is our innovation lab itself. The 4 teams were the tech teams supporting our institutional business, where we provide financial advice to multinational corporations in 98 countries around the world and many governments. The tech team supporting our global consumer bank, which is our business dedicated to our retail bank and credit card customers, where we're developing applications to create the very best customer experience, with banking increasingly being done on our smart devices, as we all know. Our cybersecurity team, protecting our clients' assets and data from the unfortunately over 3 million attempted cyber attacks we have at City on average every day. Our enterprise tech team, which supports our global functions such as risk and compliance and sets the engineering standards for all of City. These 4 groups have always partnered with each other, but have always been physically in different locations. We imagined what we would gain if we could have parts of these 4 tech groups sitting together under one roof, sharing each other's most complex problems, leveraging multidisciplinary perspectives to find innovative solutions. And to that, the unprecedented opportunity to access the wisdom from world-renowned professors and talented graduate students right here in our Innovation Center. Innovation, particularly technological innovation, we talked a lot about this today, is essential to City's ability to stay in front and win in the digital age that we're in. So here's one example. Quantum computing has gone from something I never thought I would see in my career to being realized possibly within the next 10, maybe 5 years from now. Quantum computing will allow us to solve complex problems at a speed that hitherto unknown and allow us to fully realize the potential of artificial intelligence. We are working with IBM to provide us the exclusive access to work with their latest test state version of quantum, an opportunity we would never have had if not for this partnership at Cornell Tech. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with quantum computing, the best example I can share with you is that if you were to take a set of tasks, each taking you 1 second to perform continually, doing these tasks every second for the 2 billion years, IBM's quantum computer can complete that task in literally 1 second. Imagine the power of a computer such as that. Earlier this year, Tata Consulting Services gave Cornell Tech a $50 million gift, resulting in the school being renamed the Tata Innovation Center. Here's yet another example of a company partnering with academia to drive growth. TCS will have a team of people at the center. At City, we're particularly excited with TCS's decision, as we are one of TCS's largest clients. We expect to work with TCS at the center, and for those of you who do not know, Ratan Tata, chairman of Tata Holdings, is a Cornell alum, and here he is at the ribbon cutting of the Innovation Center itself. You know, as we've talked today, many companies face a war for talent in technology. Here in the United States, there are more tech roles than technologists, for sure. We recognize that City, we needed to develop innovative ways to attract the best and brightest in technology. And so we believe when we are able to show tech students what we do for our clients, they will want to work for us. And so having an innovation center on a campus of a cutting-edge Ivy League graduate school enables this aspiration to become a reality. Cornell Tech has many programs intended to bring companies and students together for mutual benefits. In this fall semester, Cornell Tech launched its Product Challenge. The Product Challenge involves companies submitting problems they're facing, and then students are able to select which problems they want to work on. A proverbial candy store for students to choose from. Just last month, 8 students from 2 different teams selected 2 of our projects involving some complex technology challenges. And those 8 students will work with our technologists several days each week for the entire fall semester. Without question, we know this will be a win-win experience, one that fits with many of the ideas shared at this conference throughout the day, where academia works alongside business and everyone benefits. So thank you for the opportunity to share at least one story of our example of how a company and a higher educational institution have been partnering to drive learning and economic growth. I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bruce. So before we turn to the question and answer and the discussion, let me invite to the podium William Burke White, who is professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for having me today. I come to you having committed perhaps the greatest sin of someone on a panel, which is to walk in after the panel has started. I couldn't blame getting trapped in the metal detectors downstairs for quite some time, but really a pleasure to join you. And I want to talk a little bit about some exciting aspects of global education and some new models that we're testing and putting to use at the University of Pennsylvania. To do that, I want to start by sharing a little bit about how we see and think about global education and how it's changing, and then talk about 3 models that we're employing that I think all speak to kind of where global education is headed and how it fits into the sort of landscape of competitiveness and global productivity. When I showed up in college, I was already a bit of an internationalist to begin with. I had spent much of my childhood growing up in Russia and in China and elsewhere. But fundamentally, for most students coming into college, 20-something years ago, college was their first major global opportunity and their first chance to study foreign languages at a high level and often their first chance to travel. And I think the first piece that has changed in that landscape is that students showing up for undergraduate education are already truly global, and that has had to change how we think about our mission as global educators. Secondly, that issues have become truly global. Global no longer fits in a corner of the academic curriculum. It's no longer what you do to go study your foreign language or your foreign literature. It fits across the entire landscape. Third, global has become much more practical and problem-oriented in how students think about it. Students aren't just interested in learning about a country. I was a Russian literature major. I wanted to read Russian poetry, I guess because I like Russian poetry. Today, students come in because they want to solve climate change or they want to figure out how to make a vast amount of money hedging some new derivative. But they're thinking about the global in a practical and problem-oriented approach. Global is cross-cutting thematically, right? It is thinking about the world and thinking about problems and thinking about regions and thinking about languages all at the same time and having to restructure how we think about education to be much more cross-cutting and much more integrated. It is integrated throughout the curriculum, throughout every aspect of what a student does. We're in the middle of preparing the Penn football team to fly to China to play a football game, and suddenly I'm thinking not how I educate the students doing study abroad in China, but how I educate football players to what Chinese culture is and what Chinese politics are and what not to do if you don't want to get arrested. At the same time, global has come to us, right? It used to be that American educational institutions were about taking Americans and perhaps making them more global in their thinking. Today we have the Chinese student who is here doing an engineering master's degree, the student from Italy who has come to study English, and the American student who wants to study engineering and Italian at the same time. The university has become a place that convenes the world probably more than any other sets of institutions in the American economy and society. So we have to think about educating global citizens in America and not just educating Americans to be global citizens. So what does this mean about the landscape of international education today? It fundamentally means the models are changing. 20, 25 years ago, the models were pretty simple. You had language departments, you had regional studies departments, and you had study abroad. And then you were done, and it was easy. The student could study Russian for their first 3 years, and in their 4th year go study for at Moscow State University, and come home and say they have now had a global education. Those models still exist in certain places, but the fundamental model of what works is very different today. We have to be much more open to different forms of global education, different purposes of it, and different modes of it. I want to talk particularly about 3 things that we're doing at Penn that I know other universities are doing in different ways that I think speak to that and then tie them back to the question of global competitiveness and productivity. The first is an old model that is changing. That model is the Water Institute, which sits both at the Wharton School of Business and the School of Arts and Sciences and draws students from other places like the law school. Water was, in my mind, the quintessential perfect example of language and culture education. Students came in with a language proficiency, they moved that proficiency to fluency. They also studied the country and culture at the same time as doing a master's in business administration or a law degree, so that when they graduated, they could go and work at a law firm in Tokyo, or work in Beijing at a for-profit company, or go work at an NGO in Europe if they wanted to. That model was great, and it still is great, but what we're seeing is that the different students are coming in and they want different skill sets. They not only want to come in and master a language, they actually already are coming in fluent in 3 languages, because they might have grown up in Shanghai to a parent who was French and a parent who was American and speak Mandarin, French, and English before even getting there. The language side is happening so much more before college that in some ways that is being de-emphasized as part of the curricular program. It's still critical, but that's not first and foremost what they're getting out of the program. To supplement that, we've added at the Water Institute a global track that fundamentally says a lot of students already have that language education. They need to learn about how to think about global issues and global institutions to add to their regional knowledge. We've also realized that student who grew up in Shanghai may have more to learn about America, even if they have an American passport, because that's no longer really relevant. Then in that global track, you know where we take them on their first journey? They go and travel around the world while they're there. South Carolina and Alabama and Mississippi, because those students probably know less about the American South and have more to learn about the American South in building their global education than they're going to learn by going to Shanghai or Beijing or London. So taking the old language and regional models, modernizing and teaching them about how international institutions work. I see Esther, I work with the State Department there. We want that student to understand how the UN works, not just how the Chinese government works. So that's about taking an old model and shifting it. I want to give you a second example, and that's about taking an old model and fundamentally disrupting it. And that old model is study abroad. Study abroad was envisioned as a semester or a year spent living in a foreign country. Well, again, many students have already lived in a foreign country before they even show up at our doors, so that model is less interesting to them. And many students today also want to play on the varsity hockey team while, being editor of the student newspaper and doing 3, Silicon Valley startups all in their junior year. It's a little hard to move to a remote corner of Russia, which is what I was able to do when I was in school. So many different models. And the model that we have found to be incredibly successful is essentially embedding a very intense travel component into an existing course framework. This model works so well because you're not just sending the student off, you're embedding their travel experience, which is shortened and intensified, into a broader curriculum with a faculty member or multiple faculty members who then lead and supervise that trip. And sure, you may get less cultural immersion than if you moved to rural Mongolia for a year, but you may get more out of it for what you actually want to accomplish in life. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of these, both at the graduate and undergraduate levels. I taught a course a couple of years ago that fit this model at the law school on rising powers and the international order. We did a year-long course where we took our students during January to Beijing and Shanghai, and in March to Brazil, to Rio, Sao Paulo, and Brasilia, to look at 2 different models of rising powers and how they were dealing with issues like corruption and engaging with the international order. We were in Petrobras the day the Brazilian authorities came to seize the documents, and the general counsel said, "Sorry, I gotta go to jail." That is a fundamentally different experience than spending a year in rural Mongolia, but for a student who's interested in a career on anti-corruption, that may be a much more powerful experience. And the fact that when they got home, they were able to sit with me and other visitors that we brought in and bring those 2 incredible weeks of travel to some kind of closure in an academic setting, and they could still be on the varsity hockey team because they were gone for spring break in January week rather gone throughout the semester. I taught a similar class on transitional justice in Uganda, and I took my students to northern Uganda, and we went and interviewed members of the Lord's Resistance Army and members of the Ugandan government, and again, that's with grad students, and is an incredibly successful model of how to get them those experiences they could never get here, but embed it in a structure that makes sense. I'll give you a third example, and that's the institution I run. It's called Perry Worldhouse. It just opened on Penn's campus 2 years ago, and we are a think tank embedded within a university. We're not part of any school on Penn's campus, but work with all 12 Penn schools. We have 2 fundamental missions: to transform the culture of the university to be more global and policy-oriented, and then to take academic knowledge and bring it to bear on solving big global policy challenges. We bring the best academic minds and the best policy minds from around the world. We throw them in a room for a semester and give them a problem to take on. We have 2 big research themes that are based on the nature of the challenges the world faces today and where there are intellectual resources at Penn. One is around the future of the global order, technology, power, and governance. And we look at questions like, what happens when AI changes the workforce in China and that destabilizes the Chinese government? Maybe. And what should we as America do about that? Or what does the renegotiation of NAFTA mean for the U.S. economy and for Mexican politics? And to think about those things, we had President Calderon, who was the president of Mexico, with us for a month in September, thinking about the renegotiation of NAFTA and its political effects in Mexico. And we had H.R. McMaster and Susan Rice as visitors this semester, thinking about AI in China or the governance of drones. And we bring students and faculty and policy visitors and scholars together around those topics. I know a couple people in the room have actually been to some of the workshops that we do. What's different about this model? Well, first of all, it is thematic rather than regional. We don't say we're going to work on China or Russia. We say we're going to work on climate migration, or from the other theme, it's around global shifts, human movements, right? So climate migration is the driver of that. How do we respond to climate migration? Or what do we do to govern drone technologies? We take on topics that are problem-oriented, partly because that's how students want to think, but also if we want to have a meaningful impact on productivity and sort of the broader global competitiveness world, both as an educational institution and as a nation and a global community, we've got to be tackling those problems. So we're thematic rather than regional. And secondly, we're expressly policy-oriented. We want to bring the policy world and policy questions, just as in the business world, those questions are coming in incubators around campus. We want to do that in the policy space. We're only a year and a half, 2 years old, so it's still all a bit of an experiment, but it seems to be working as a different kind of model of a university research center, one that's deeply engaged overseas and in Washington, that brings together the academic and policy worlds that too often speak totally different languages to one another. Sometimes that's a translation function, sometimes it's a convening function, but it's incredible what happens when you put those minds together and get them to start speaking the same language. I'm probably out of time. The last thing I want to say is, what does this mean for global and American competitiveness? Well, obviously, we're building a global workforce. I think we have to think about how we prepare students to be much more dexterous in their application of global knowledge. We are solving global challenges, and some of those global challenges, I think, make us both more competitive as a government, make international institutions work better, and frankly, we're transcending national boundaries, because we have to recognize that American education today is a global education, both in terms of the students coming in, the students coming out, the academics that we're bringing together, the policymakers that we're bringing together, and fundamentally, I think we have to think of how academic institutions can transcend those boundaries in lots of new ways. So I'll stop there and look forward to a discussion in Q&A, and thanks for tolerating my late arrival.
Thank you very much. I mean, we have here essentially a window into the future with three very different themes. One is essentially how can we finance the higher education process, if you will, and the question that I would ask Tonio is where is the financial burden, where is it falling? The second theme is obviously a center here of excellence, if I may use that term, developing in a city a hub that is very much innovative, focused on innovation. And then the third theme is really to go against the grain of what we're seeing in terms of policymaking today in DC, and it is really looking at the continuation, or I should say the transcending globalization at the educational level. So in that respect, first, if I may, as the moderator, ask the first question, then we'll open it to the audience. Again, the burden of finance, Tonio. For Bruce, I would very much like to ask the bridge that you have here between the private sector and the academic entity. To what extent is this a monopolistic bridge between city and the entity, or will you be able to open it up to other private sector entities? And finally, is it William or Bill?
Bill for you guys.
Okay.
Somewhere on some passport it says William, but we're in a post-passport age.
Okay. To what extent do you think that this particular model can influence policymaking at the global, or even not even global, but at some pan-regional level, given the nationalistic tone or undercurrent that is developing, not just here in the US, but overseas as well? So perhaps, Tony, you want to start off?
Sure, thank you. Is this loud enough?
Yes.
I think the question of where's the financial burden falling, if I'm hearing that right, Kathleen, or interpreting it correctly, is when someone funds education based on success-based tuition, if you will, who pays for that? Like, there's a new value, there's some downside protection for a student, right? So I'll tell you who's not paying for it. Where it's not falling is on typical student, because now they're in a better deal than they had if they were paying up front with no risk share, no kind of no help on the outcome necessarily, and they're in a different kind of situation where if they borrowed money and had a time value money calculator, loan interest running the whole time. And so it's not falling on students. What we're finding is actually that, this could be done more than one way. I mean, it could be done in competition with loans, you could come try to sell money over the internet this way. But that's not what we do. We've seen succeed in this is when colleges partner directly with their students this way, it's so wildly popular with students that their cost of acquiring students, 20 to 30% of their revenue at a lot of colleges gets spent on acquisition, whether they want to say that. Sometimes it's a D3 schools, it could be a sports coach who really is just there to recruit people. But it's 20 to 30% of revenue, sometimes discount rates of 50% to recruit people or keep them enrolled, so keep them transferring out or quitting when they're like most of the way towards something really valuable as a junior or senior, or even a fifth-year senior. This is so wildly popular with students that it drops the cost of doing that for colleges by an amount more than the typical losses on the group. And so our college clients are doing this on their balance sheets, and they're doing it with endowment capital. Some of the non-colleges who are newer institutions doing this for all of their tuition, we're having to find outside investors. And so investors are interested in this, but I would say that generally this is a thing when done right makes the entire system work better. And so the savings can be used to subsidize it.
Kathleen, I'm glad you asked about, the other tenets of the Innovation Center at Cornell. When we were first interested in being a part of the campus, we wanted to be the only financial institution, and for Cornell's standpoint, they were perfectly comfortable with that because their view was they wanted to curate a set of companies in all different industries. And so that's what they've done. There are companies in a number of different industries. There's a company that manufactures robots. There's a company doing cancer research. There's Ferrara International, the chocolate company, a wonderful neighbor. And of course, Tata Consulting Services. And we hope over time to work with some of these companies. The companies that we're most excited about working with, of course, in addition to the faculty being right there and the students working alongside us, is that a number of Cornell Tech graduates have an interest in developing their startup. They have already developed about 35 new startup companies since the beginning of the school being established 4 years ago. And that was the whole purpose, to create companies and create jobs and an engine of growth, as I said. One of the companies, one of the things that the school does for certain graduates who are selected for their ideas is they are awarded space at the school to run their startup. A wonderful opportunity for a group of students hard pressed for funding in the beginning of their tenure. And so we really are working with a number of these startups to help them. We learn from them, they learn from us, and it's an exciting new partnership for us as well.
That's very good. On a different subject, but it's a grave concern that I have, so I hope that you will assuage my anxiety here. If you're familiar with the topography of New York and Manhattan, Roosevelt Island is in the middle of the East River. And when you have a northeastern or any kind of major storm, you know that it's churning straight into the East River. So seeing these beautiful buildings, has there been any thought about, protecting from potential flood or other types of destruction?
That's a good question, and for those of you who 5 or so years ago lived in the New York area know that we experienced Hurricane Sandy, and a number of parts of New York suffered greatly from the flooding that occurred. We're very fortunate that Roosevelt Island is not in that flood zone, and when people first heard about the school at Roosevelt Island, and a lot of New York residents really didn't know about Roosevelt Island. If you ask the average person, they've never ever been to Roosevelt Island, even though it sits right in the East River, right next to Manhattan, and in between Manhattan and Queens. The fact is, it is actually a pretty easy place to get to. There's a subway station, most people don't realize that. There are now ferries that go right from the island to Manhattan and Queens. There's a tram that most people know that goes from Manhattan to Roosevelt Island, and you can actually even drive onto the island from Queens. There's a bridge from Queens to Roosevelt Island, so it's pretty accessible, and we're all figuring that out as we've gotten to know how. But from a storm standpoint, I think we're safe. God forbid,
Until we know.
the next 100-year
Right.
storm.
Okay, so thank you, Bruce. So, Bill, power of shaping
Yeah.
the discussion.
How can we, shape discourse today? And obviously, anywhere in the world you look, there are rising trends of populism and nationalism. Brazil may be the latest in that wind. So we've got a couple of ideas and thoughts about how to do that, and we're testing them. The first thing is we are absolutely committed to openness of ideas, right? We want to be a place that people can bring lots of different viewpoints and knock on wood that has yet to be problematic on Penn's campus. Last week I had H.R. McMaster and Susan Rice on the same stage. And if you can get the two past national security advisors, well, leaving one out who's not available for other reasons, that's the kind of debate that we want to have. And we've also tried to do that on a global scale. If I invite the Saudi ambassador, the next day the Qatari ambassador is going to speak, right? So we do want to promote that. How do you actually influence policy, though? We've taken a view to say that, one of the reasons we bring the kinds of visitors we bring is they have a lot of experience, people who have served at the highest levels of the U.S. and foreign governments. They're also validators, right? So when they go back into government or back to their home countries or back into the D.C. policy space, they just spend a month in an academic institution or a week or however long they're with us. Maybe it's a full year. And these are people whose careers tend to take them in and out of different kinds of institutions, and they will bring those ideas with you and validate them. When I worked for Secretary Clinton at the State Department, I sat through a lot of meetings, and there were a lot of people who would say something, I would say something, people would say, that's an academic idea, with a bit of scorn and derision. But I could, and then they'd settle on some policy, and I'd actually be able to sit there and trace that, whatever the new policy was, back to an academic idea that might have been 15 years old and percolated its way from an academic article to something that a think tank put out, to something that finally got on somebody's desk, and then eventually some policymaker thought it was their own idea. But that requires a lot of translation. And academics, when I write academic articles, which I sometimes have time to do, my mom reads it, and if I'm lucky, my dog reads it, and that's probably it. Because I write it for a community of 10 people having the same debates in international law that I'm having. The idea is, how do we translate that? And partly we translate that by creating intermediaries who are able to do that. The think tank community has been a great intermediary, but we can also do that ourselves. And so we do a lot of translation of academic work. The third thing, and in some ways maybe the most important, is to get academics to think a little differently. Which is to say, we try to bring policymakers to sit down with academics when the academics are defining their research agenda, when they're figuring out what the question they're going to ask is. Because if I can help an academic, see that answering, designing a research project in this way, or framing the question in this way is going to have a lot more traction in Washington or at the UN, then it will be more useful in the sort of having final impact. And then getting academics out of the little boxes that we all live in, right? We all live in silos. Those silos lead to framing of things that just aren't often useful, but real problems require a lawyer and an engineer and a business person and a philosopher to be in the same conversation. So creating spaces where you can do that, where you can actually kind of have a holistic approach rather than the siloed approach that academic institutions tend to take. I think it takes all of that, and then it takes a lot of luck, or maybe a little bit of a hook, right? You got good ideas, and they're sitting there, and your academics have made written papers on them. Then you wait for the world event that's going to matter to get people to pay attention to it. We just did a big event in D.C. on NAFTA renegotiation. A lot of that was work that's been going on in Penn for a long time, people thinking about trade policy, but suddenly Donald Trump and the NAFTA renegotiation was the hook that meant that when we did the event, we could get 50 congressional staffers to come and listen to it on the Hill, because they're not going to come up to Philadelphia. Right, so there are a lot of sort of different tactics, but strategically I think it's about validation of those ideas, translation of those ideas, and then finding the right opportunity for them to enter the policy debate.
So in that respect, I think that there are some very, very strong parallels with your model and Bruce's model in terms of bridging
Absolutely.
academics or research.
And whether you're bridging with the policy space or the corporate space,
in many ways, it's the same challenges, you just have slightly different target audiences, and finding partnerships like the one you're doing, I think, is a great strategy to do that. We've done that with some think tanks, and in some ways, the national government official visitors are partnerships with future governments and past governments, even though they're not formally framed as such.
And the lucky part that you both seem to have is the financing, which is what Tonio is trying to give to the masses, if I may say so, in terms of student body. So it kind of all ties together for essentially building the future in terms of both academic research, higher education, and this bridge to the private sector. We're leaving out the government sector here. That's a little bit, I'm a bit chagrined by that, but perhaps there is another conduit in that respect. But that conduit I will leave to the audience. If you do have any questions, this is the time. Yes.
Again, thank you to the panel, very stimulating. I want to pick up on a couple different things. In your question, you had actually asked about what international organizations and other entities are also doing, to say that this debate about globally prepared workforce, but also the nature of education, is appearing in several other international venues that are relevant for this conversation. I would flag first the European Union and the Erasmus program, which is one of the most dynamic programs on the planet. It's now with the Erasmus Plus, even Americans are eligible. It's an extremely important program. It's an international organization that's working on education in the future. The second I would flag would actually be the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that the new Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 4, includes education, including higher education. So part of the global conversation of this series is happening in that channel. I will flag UNESCO, and I certainly hope that, I'm of course deeply disappointed about this administration's view on UNESCO, something I've cared about for 30 years, but I'll say hopefully maybe we can return. Finally, I would flag the work, we've all been citing OECD statistics. That's another example of a place that's thinking about these issues. Also, other countries are following the U.S. model of the importance of international students and the importance of fueling innovation in this area. And finally, to pick up on this last point, and I'd be interested that one area you mentioned we haven't picked up on government, I would say that we talked about the role of what the business community wants, the role of what the education community wants, the importance of creating the skills for the workforce. We've talked about the importance of personal development. What about being a good citizen? Maybe it's because we're in Philadelphia, that when we actually first started, as I recall, a famous citizen of this city, spent a lot of time thinking about the role of public education in creating the informed citizen. And so that part of the answer to the financing is that, and no one mentioned, was the reduction in public funding that also has affected the cost of education. So also the question is, what is our answer as citizens about what we want and how we think the higher education and business community responds to the needs of the public life? Thank you.
Anyone wants to?
I would just say one thing, that Cornell Tech recognizes that it shouldn't all be about educating the 250 graduate students on campus. It's actually about participating and educating the students of New York City at large. And they're spending time in a number of different elementary schools and high schools, teaching technology at different levels. Given that they have these world-renowned professors and graduate students, and helping to elevate the level of education in technology in the school systems in New York City. And so I'm encouraging their involvement in that.
Very good point. And there you really start to see the daunting task that this implies. And again, the role of government perhaps in drawing, and from K to 12, right? And we talked about that earlier, about that importance as well. Yeah.
Esther, I would just say I couldn't agree more with everything that you said on educating citizens. Ultimately, I think that is the highest calling of a university. I think it's to be global citizens as well as citizens of the different professions and skills and so forth. There's a certain set of programs that we can do that focus on the student who really wants global to be their fundamental framing, but it's also giving just enough to the football player who's going to China. that they come out of that experience with a different and global view, because that may be what ends up getting them the job that they want, or, the graduate education when their interest sets presumably, shift over time. So, thinking both what we do, for in depth and breadth. I just also want to say the cost and finance questions have come up a couple of times. And figuring out how to do the global right, I think is essential to the financing of America's educational institutions going forward, right? Penn has more international students, I think, than any other Ivy League school, by percentage anyway. And I will tell you that, Penn has tuition, what's the word I'm looking for? Need blind admissions for students from North America, but not from the rest of the world. It's something we are working on, but those two things come together to tell you something about, university finance. So I think figuring out how you get a great experience for the students who are coming from abroad, both to educate them about being in America and being part of this country and this community, but doing so in a way that also enriches the lives of the American students here is going to be one of the challenges that I think any international educational institution has to grapple with and figure out how to get right.
Right, and we talked about that earlier, and in fact, that seems to be an issue that is becoming a little more difficult or challenging these days. Any other question? It couldn't have been that clear. Well, I guess it's late, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll do this. Okay, so it's my task as well to wrap up today. I wanted to thank all of you for coming. I wanted to thank this excellent panel for their remarks and presentation on some really novel thinking and projects that are occurring. I want to also thank our sponsors and presenters. And also a special thanks to Jill and Colleen for, these programs are difficult and really do require a lot of attention, and they're the best. So I want to leave you with 3 hopes. And these hopes are something like this. So I hope, number one, we've provided a distinguished forum. That is, we've exposed you to some new ideas, at least one new idea, one new thought, one takeaway from leaving here. 2, I really hope that you stay engaged with the GIC, that you look at what we do, look at our website, look at our programs regionally, nationally, and abroad, and join us or just join us in our programming and attend them. The third hope is that I, for one, think today, and hope you do as well, that we're really talking about quality of life. And that's what education is, quality of life. So on that note, I want to thank you again and also ask you, don't forget to fill out that form in your booklet if you care to do so. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you at the next program.